I want to start big picture, and then I'm sure we'll dive deeper on a lot of these individual issues. But in the first week, you've talked about a lot of projects that have public support, will also need public money. And so I want to understand where that money will come from and have you give us some sense of priority on these. There are costs of getting out of the streetcar and the parking contracts. There will be expense of likely lawsuits that emerge from those. The city owes a multi-million-dollar contribution within the next month to make the MLK interchange happen next year. There's Wasson Way, Smale Riverfront Park, an economic development fund for the Port Authority for Economic Development. You've expressed, I think, support for all those. There's public interest in those. Talk about priority and where the money comes from now.
Well, first and foremost, well, I don't know if first and foremost, but in terms of the timing, today OKI is approving the plan for the I-71 Martin Luther King interchange. And I'm going to go to that meeting just to show my support for the project after this meeting. And as you know, or may know, that I'm proud to say that I started the MLK interchange project 10 years ago. And it's something I worked on for many, many, many years. And I led the effort to put together the money for the studies that got us to where we are. So it's an extremely high priority for me and for this region. And, you know, frankly, it's such a critical investment that the $20 million that they need from the city should be issued in general obligation bonds that we can do immediately. Frankly, in my opinion, there'll be other places in the capital budget that we can take from it, but it's so critical and urgent that I have no problem issuing GO bonds to pay for it.
So you had also talked about bonds for some of the pension expenses, I think.
Yeah. Well, that's a different issue, but
well, how much of that can you do, I guess, is one question. And then come back to the capital budget. You've made mention of pulling money from the capital budget away from other things a few times. What are those things you pull money away from?
Well, let's talk about the capital budget. The city's capital budget, you know, which is a good capital budget, it has about $80 million a year. About $60 million of that $80 million has to go to Smale infrastructure, preserving existing infrastructure. $20 million is available to do infrastructure, but also to do economic development. And I think as a general principle, we want to make strategic economic investments. One of the big issues with the streetcar is that because it's not Smale eligible spending, the money to pay off the bonds associated with the streetcar comes out of that $20 million a year out of the capital budget, plus some other sources. And so it is a huge detriment to our city's ability to make economic development investments, the streetcar. And frankly, if you assume that the streetcar will continue to have cost overruns as I do, that the Duke Energy utility movement will be more expensive than advertised as I do, and the future phases, eventually a streetcar would gobble up the entire $20 million necessary on an annual basis. Now, to answer the other priorities that you asked about, in addition to taking money out of the capital budget of the city, the streetcar is also taking money from the Blue Ash Airport. Blue Ash Airport money can and should be used to pay for things like Wasson Way and Westwood Square. The Riverfront Park, which is another strategic priority of mine, was originally designed to be paid for from the Banks TIF that I helped create south of 4th Street. And that TIF has been dedicated outside the footprint of the actual banks itself. The other properties below 4th Street has been dedicated to the streetcar. So if we cancel the streetcar, that also frees up money to pay for the Riverfront Park.
Let me jump in here.
Yeah.
You have said you want to cancel the streetcar because it's eating up too much of the capital budget and other budgets. Would you consider alternative funding for the streetcar, or in your view, is it dead? I mean, would you look at a joint economic development zone? Are you willing to consider other ways of funding the streetcar?
I mean, the devil's in the details, but you know, someone asked me this morning if the property owners along the streetcar line wanted to pay for it all themselves, that's fine. Under existing state law, special improvement district legislation, I think it's 1701 under the revised code. Property owners have the right to petition. We already have this with DCI. DCI is a special improvement district. The property owners have agreed to tax themselves additionally to pay for DCI, and if the property owners along the streetcar route want to pay for it, that's fine. I'm highly skeptical that they would take on a burden that large, but obviously they could pursue it.
Would you help them look for other sources of funding?
Well, honestly, my priorities are not the streetcar. So, where I intend to spend my strategic focus after we remove some of these, what I call negative energy issues, is on job growth, safety, inclusion, and getting the budget in order, and neighborhood development. So, streetcar's not really on that list, but I'm not going to put obstacles in the way.
Okay.
John, let me ask you a question about job growth.
Yeah.
The parking lease, part of
Yeah.
the purpose of that was
Right.
to invest in economic development projects that presumably would create
Right.
jobs. So where do you get that kind of money to do that?
Yeah.
And how do you jumpstart economic development without that parking lease deal?
I've been asked this question a lot. I keep saying to folks, well, what do you want to spend money on? And let's talk about what the options are. The idea that we're going to leverage revenue streams and spend everything today at the expense of the future is just a stewardship model that I don't agree with. I think that the future should have the opportunity to have recurring revenue streams that haven't been eaten up to pay off debt from today. That's not to say we never take on debt. I already said I'd take on some debt for the MLK interchange, but the point is that we were told that the thing was needed for Fourth and Race. Well, they went ahead with Fourth and Race, anyway. The other projects that were mentioned, the Riverfront Park can be finished with the TIF money once we cancel the streetcar. Wasson Way can be paid for with Blue Ash Airport funds once we cancel the streetcar. Westwood Square can be paid for with Blue Ash Airport funds once the streetcar is canceled. And we free up on a recurring annual basis the $20 million out of the capital budget for strategic economic development on an ongoing basis.
Part of the money could also have been used as to create or to seed an economic development fund for the Port Authority,
Right.
another job-creating
Right.
entity.
Right.
So do you agree that they need a sizable development fund, and how much do they need, and again, where does it come from?
Yes, I do believe they need a sizable seed fund. Let me step back. About 12 years ago, I guess 10, 12 years ago, the city received a $54 million windfall from the Anthem demutualization. And the question at that time was whether we would use it to paper over our deficit or use it for economic development. And in a bipartisan group that included David Pepper, Alicia Reese, Pat DeWine, and myself, and others, we agreed that we would not use it to paper over the deficit, but would use it for strategic investments. And specifically, Pat DeWine and I went to Provident Bank, U.S. Bank, and Fifth Third, Bob Hoverson at Provident, George Schaefer at Fifth Third, and Jim Schwab at U.S. Bank. And we took $15 million of that $54 million, and we asked each of those banks to put in another $33 million. So we created a $115 million loan fund. We leveraged, in a good way, leveraged not in borrowing from future public receipts, but leveraged in the sense of bringing private dollars in. We leveraged $15 million into $115 million. And then we went to Jeannie Gallagher at the Cincinnati Development Fund, who's a superb organization, and created a loan fund, which I believe, and I may not be right on the exact numbers here, but I believe they've lent that out and had it returned and re-lent out almost 3 times in the last 10 years. So that $15 million from Anthem has resulted in over $300 million worth of investments in our community. And the banks, because the primary use of that loan pool was to support the urban pioneer condo and apartment revitalization in Over the Rhine and in our neighborhoods. That money has been extremely helpful in creating the critical mass of residential development in the urban core. And that model is what we want to do for the Port Authority. So what I would do and I've already expressed this to Laura Bruner and to members of the Port Board, is work with them and with a large seed grant from the city, we want to turn that into a much larger fund that would include private sector bank funding to create a large loan pool that the port could use, similar to the equity fund that 3CDC uses and similar to what the Cincinnati Development Fund uses. The Cincinnati Development Fund was originally residential only. And several years ago, as the market changed, Chris Sports and others actually modified the program and expanded what they could do to commercial. So I think, similarly, I think the port should have flexibility within parameters to take a fund like that and have a real, one of the great powers of 3CDC is that they have the equity fund. And they're like their own, when no one was lending during the worst of the economic crisis, they were their own bank. And the port needs something similar to that. But I think it needs to be predominantly private dollars. But I think the city can be a partner to provide that seed funding that will help convince banks to come in. And when Pat DeWine and I went to those 3 banks, these were not loans. At the time that we did this, you had low interest rates. You had home building was exploding in suburban areas. And there was a real lack of demand for urban housing and whatnot. And so there was very difficulty for urban pioneers to get lending and financing for renovation of historic buildings and new apartment and housing opportunities. And so the banks were hesitant. And we took a shared but first loss position that we would lose the first 15 cents on every dollar. Now, the private sector would lose 85 cents on the dollar if deals went bad. And that is what led the banks to being willing to put the money into these loan pools. And I think we have to be realistic that when the port goes into strategic areas like Bond Hill or Queensgate or others, that there is probably a risk premium, and the city's going to have to play a part to buy down that risk premium.
So how large is a large seed grant from the city, and where does that come from, and when does that need to happen?
Well, I think, let's step back. I think there's a couple things the port needs. I think short term, they have some very high-profile projects in Bond Hill and others that may need direct capital assistance, which we plan to provide, which can come from the capital budget, can come from casino money, can come from the Blue Ash portion. I mean, there's plenty of options. I think what I'm talking about, though, of a much larger loan pool, so they can have sort of their own financing options. It needs to be a process where we work together to convince the private sector to come in and put money in, and obviously that'll take time to work that out.
Right, but you suggested that one of the ways you do that is the city kicks it off, starts the seed money with, with something large.
We make a contingent, but we don't just write the check. We want the check to be written on the condition that the private sector comes in. So we use that to, as I say, we will put serious money down.
So what's serious money?
Some
kind of range. What kind of range is serious money to be meaningful?
We did $15 million for the Cincinnati Development Fund, so I would expect it to be larger than that.
And again, what's the right timing for that? In order to kickstart job creation, economic development, is that something that?
Oh yeah, it's top priority. I mean, the
first quarter of your?
Carol, it's been a week.
People are becoming conditioned to expecting action from you.
I know, I'm not even in office yet. I think I have a track record of moving quickly. I'm going to move. This is a high priority issue, but I can't make the banks write checks to the Port Authority. So, I need other people's buy-in.
John, we have a question from a viewer along the lines of private sector participation in public projects. Right. Would you ask property owners around the proposed interchange, the MLK interchange, to participate in financing that project?
Or the property owners that are going to benefit from it, UC and all the other uptown businesses?
Well, it depends on how expensive it gets. I mean, I think right now the $20 million that we've committed to is can be absorbed within our capital budget. If the number got bigger, I think all options would be on the table.
But let's go back to parking privatization. Do you intend for the city to keep the parking assets, or would you consider another privatization plan? And if the city is going to keep the assets, do you plan to modernize and upgrade?
Well, let me deal with the second question first. We definitely need to modernize the system, both the garages and the meters. I mean, every meter in the city needs to take credit cards. I mean, that's just a no-brainer. And that can be done internally or by a contract.
If it's done internally, where does the money come from for that?
Well, I think it comes from the from the parking fund. I mean, I never had a problem with borrowing from the parking plan to modernize the parking system. That's you believe that the system's going to add value, and so the value you add to the system by modernizing it will pay off the debt associated with the upgrades, and so I don't have a problem with that. I think the first question is an open question. I mean, although I would never describe it as privatization, and I've been very clear that these are public assets, and the meters especially need to be subject to regular public oversight. So I felt all along that the deal that was proposed would lead to aggressive enforcement. And Xerox was going to get a 10-year no-bid contract to manage it. And if I'm right, then we have 10 years of misery.
But, I mean, there's an alternative to enforcement. Just feed the meters, make sure you're compliant, right?
Yeah, but that's not how the market works. I mean, we're competing with, in the region, we're competing with Northern Kentucky and Blue Ash and Kenwood, which has predominantly free parking. And so we have to be respectful of our small businesses, our restaurateurs, our neighborhood business districts. And, if every time you go to Grader's at Hyde Park Square, you get a ticket if you're a minute late, yeah, you should have paid the ticket. But, if it's too aggressive, just like we saw in St. Bernard, it's going to deter business. Now, I believe we can and should get more money out of the system than we currently do. When I was on council, we got an average of $12 million a year. Now we're getting $7 million. So I think we can increase the revenue stream from the system. But if we go too aggressively and we start getting a major outcry from our small businesses and from our consumers and from our, people that we want to come shopping into the city, then we maintain the right to dial that back. But if you leverage it and you give away long-term contracts, no-bid contracts, you lose that ability to make adjustments for the economy, for public outcry, for neighborhood business districts. And so, is it possible that we contract out the management of the system? Yeah, it's possible. We're going to have those conversations. But, my preference and my strong opinion is that should not be done more than on a 1 or 2 year basis maximum, so that if we don't like the operator, we can make adjustments.
James Pilcher has a follow-up.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hey, James.
You had said earlier, you had said earlier that one of your top priorities was straightening out the budget. As you know, the budget has been running a deficit for 9 out of the last 12 years, I think it is.
I don't agree with that, but.
Yeah. And that one-time sources have been used. The parking money was going to be used this year to fill a hole.
Right.
Some of that money you talked about with the Anthem money had been used to fill some holes in the operating budget.
But not under my leadership.
Under the no, I understand. Under the now that the parking deal is going to probably go away, how do you intend to fill that hole in the current budget, and how do you intend to restructure the budget long term so we don't keep having to have these one-time fixes?
Great question. We intend to have hearings as early as January. The budget, they switched it to a June 30th, deadline. So I can tell you, this isn't just my opinion. The council members who have been elected have expressed deep, deep interest in this issue. Kevin Flynn, David Mann, Amy Murray, and those just happen to be the new members, but the existing members feel strongly that they want to tackle this issue and do it in a public and transparent manner, and to have months of hearings as city council. And I don't want to steal their thunder. I think they're going to be announcing a number of plans to really have a real open process and talk through those issues. But at the end of the day, as I've said from day one, I think budgeting is about priorities, and police, fire, parks and recreation, health and human services, road paving, garbage collection, litter pickup. These, in my opinion, are the basic core services. And collectively, all of that costs $300 million. And the budget's, as you know, about $368 million. Now, the $365 million, I think, doesn't include the casino money. If you add the casino money, the budget, say, $375 million. And so I've always made no bones about it that I think the cuts that we need to make to balance the budget need to come out of that 68 to 75 million that I don't think are as essential as the things in the items that I mentioned.
In examining it, it also appeared that, revenues have been very, very flat.
Yeah.
Over the last 10 to 15 years, especially because of the recession.
Right.
The current income tax has not gone up since the last raise was in the late 80s, early 90s.
Right.
If it came down to it and the city did need more revenue, would you support a potential income tax increase?
I do not support a raise in the earnings tax. I mean, I'm not taking some, pledge that it would never, ever, ever happen. But I don't have any reason to believe that it is necessary now or any time in the foreseeable future. It would require, something catastrophic for me to change my position on that front. I believe that we have sufficient taxes to balance our budget if we get serious about our priorities, and that's what I intend to propose and to lead on.
And police and fire now make up 2/3 of the operating budget. You've signaled an intention to hire more police. How do you reconcile that with the budget shortfall that you face?
Let's spend a second on that. I think it's because it comes up a lot. First of all, I think it's sort of I think it's important to put out there that the statistics, I think, can be misleading. The city's overall budget is $1.2 billion or $1.4 billion, and the police department budget is like $120 million, I think. That's 10% of the overall budget. The fire department's like $90 million, so it's even less than that. Now, when people say that the police and fire are 2/3 of the budget, I think the average person says, wow, I mean, 2/3 of garbage collection and water and sewer and, road paving, and all of those are separate items. It's true that one budget within the overall budget, the general fund operating budget, it's about 60%.
And growing.
Well, not right now. It's receding now. It's been
Police
receding.
and fire have been growing as a part of the
Not in the last 5 years.
capital budget.
No. In fact, without any adjustment for inflation, it's less today than it was 2 years ago and 3 years ago because of attrition. I mean, we had 1,135 cops 4 years ago, and now we have like 940 something. So, I mean, when I was on council, we added officers to the street. We added 135 over 8 years. We started at 1,000. And there was a lot of public debate and disagreement as to whether it was a good idea or a bad idea to add those officers. We're not at 1,000. We're at 940 something.
But we still have more per capita than comparable cities.
I don't believe that either. I mean, depends how you look at it. I mean, New York has a much higher per capita officer per citizen ratio, and they have lowest homicide rate in the country. It's true that, if you look at say Columbus or Cleveland,
Pittsburgh.
Well, let's talk about those areas though. So Columbus, for example, their city is virtually identical to their county. But if you were to map the crime patterns, the crime would occur predominantly in the urban core of Columbus, just as it would occur predominantly in the urban core here. And so it's somewhat unfair to say, well, they have a much larger region and have less per capita. The question is not, in my mind, that there's some magic number of cop per citizen. The question is, what is the right number of cops per crime and crime statistic for the area that you're covering? And I think that's the key issue. And what I intend to do is to adopt the best patterns and practices that to see a reduction in violence and shootings and as I've said many times, the reason why, Brooklyn's the new Manhattan and Queens is the new Brooklyn and the Bronx is the new Queens is because these areas have become safe for investment again. And you think about the qualitative impact on families' lives, on having breadwinners in families, on the incredible dysfunction that results when someone in your household is murdered, and reducing that by 80% in New York over the last 20 years is an incredible opportunity to combat everything, including reducing poverty and helping build a middle class. So we can't afford to go back to 1,135 cops. I understand that, and we're not going to add cops just to add cops. We're going to adopt the best patterns and practices to hire the right number of officers, and that will take time because, first of all, recruit classes take time, and they're expensive. And there are limits to, we can't have the number of officers per capita that New York City has because we can't afford it. But I do think as we stand today, when it takes an hour to get a 911 call in District 3, we don't have enough officers right now. And I intend to add them as we can afford them.
This is a question related but beyond police headcount.
Yeah.
And this came to us via Twitter also. Are there savings to be found in the police and fire contracts? And I believe those are coming due next year.
Absolutely. I mean, just because when I outlined my priorities, it doesn't mean that they're sacred. There are savings in every department, including police and fire, that need to be pursued aggressively. And there's a lot of things we can do. Civilianize some services, and the reality is that when you factor in the cost of police and equipment and car, et cetera, and the contract, when you're paying that much, which I think people earn, you want those folks fighting crime. You don't want them answering phones and things of that nature. So I want to look at civilianizing services as a way to save money within a department because it's cheaper. In addition, we just like the city pension is a major problem. The police and fire pensions are big issues, and we need to talk to the state and that is a huge piece of the police and fire budget. Now, I'm not saying that we need to shortchange the pension. We can't, but the fact is that just as we have to do some hard things, so should they. And the police and fire pensions are dictated by state law and the state pension system, and I think we have to have that conversation because it's very expensive.
What about their benefits, such as insurance? They pay far less for health insurance than even Hamilton County Sheriff's deputies do. Is that something that you're willing to?
I think that'll be dealt with at the negotiating table, and I think we're going to put all options on the table.
But it's not. Is it a priority?
I mean, there's a lot of priorities. I mean,
Do you think they should pay more?
Well, I mean, I haven't reviewed their health benefits, so I can't answer that question right now.
Let me ask you a question about downtown retail with the news that Saks is leaving and going to Kenwood. Do you agree with the concept of creating a retail corridor on Ray Street? And what could you as a mayor and your city manager do to accomplish that and keep other retail, Macy's in particular, downtown?
Well, first of all, let me say, I think downtown is on fire and just doing spectacular. And I am confident that that is a fantastic corner that will find new life. And obviously I'm sad that Saks is leaving, but we will recover and do better. And I already, last night, spoke to Steve Leeper about this very issue, and he is as bullish as anyone. And, I think when you look about, one of the most exciting things I got to do in the last couple months is take a personal tour with Stuart Aiken at Dunnhumby, USA. And whew, you talk about the future of Cincinnati. You know that the average age of that company is 32? Average age. And the average salary is like $70,000, $80,000. I mean, it's incredible what they are doing. And this is where their world headquarters is going to be, or at least their North American headquarters. I can't remember if their overall headquarters are here or not, but they have a lot of jobs. And so I am confident that the demand that's created by those jobs and that excitement and that vibrancy is going to allow us to reposition that particular corner. And as it relates to whether it's a retail corridor or some other kind of corridor, I intend to be bullish on downtown, to help downtown grow, and to work with people that have done a pretty good job of revitalizing downtown, like 3CDC, to help get guidance. And I don't claim to be an expert at, I don't know what's the right retail corridor off the top of my head. And as a general principle, I think the market should dictate that. But I do believe that since we do make strategic investments and we do it through organizations like 3CDC, I am going to continue to accentuate that relationship because I think they're doing a heck of a job.
Do you see a role for City Hall to play in creating and moving that concept forward, or is it something that would be left to the private sector?
Well, I think
3CDC?
that, look, everything 3CDC does, with very few exceptions, involves city support. I mean, they put things together, and we tend to put money into it on a small basis, which is great because they leverage a lot of private sector investment. And their particular focus is downtown and over the Rhine, and this obviously falls into the category of downtown. And so, I intend to work with them on a solution.
What kind of support other than money can City Hall provide, should City Hall provide to move a concept like that forward aggressively?
Which concept?
The retail corridor.
I guess I'm kind of confused on the, like I said, I don't, what I want to do is, the person I wanted to talk to when I heard Sachs was leaving was Steve and get his take on it. And, since they're developing Dunnhumby across the street, he's bullish, I'm bullish. And, I don't, as a general principle, I think the market should dictate, where the retail corridor should be. I don't know if we want to arbitrarily just say it's going to be Ray Street,
I've got a question from a reader, Matt Jacob. How will you make public transportation in Cincinnati better for those who choose not to drive or cannot afford to own a car? How will you use your appointments to SORTA's board? Will you seek to change Metro's funding source from the portion of the income tax currently to a sales tax like Columbus and Cleveland?
There's a lot in there. I have a lot of ideas on this subject, and I've been involved for a long period of time on these issues. When I was on council, I was disturbed by the fact that the city has provided the only dedicated funding to the bus service for 40-some years, and yet at that time had a minority of the SORTA board appointments. And I moved very aggressively to change that. But I think it's only fair, since it's our people who are making a disproportionate contribution to the system, that our people have the best and most options. And my vision is a city where you do not have to own a car to get where you need to go or want to go. And that's not going to happen overnight, but it's something that I want to move towards. And what I would like to see is a number of ways to pursue additional service and routes, crosstown routes. I mean, I always liked the Metro Moves bus plan that was put out over 10 years ago. And I'd like to see us move to that sort of getting away from the hub and spoke and using more routes and whatnot. I think specifically I would like to aggressively make sure that Metro, and I will certainly use my appointment power to make sure that we move in this direction, will aggressively reach out to employers and develop a network of employers who, and see if the public transit is meeting their needs. And if not, if there are employers who are on a route but are willing to pay the marginal cost of adding a route, that'd be a way to infuse more money into the system and expand public transit options. And I think we have to be creative in finding new methods for revenue to come into the system. I've always said that the county and the suburban area should pay more, and that could be a sales tax. That could be out of jurisdictions, general fund, anywhere. But I think it's only equitable that the suburban and greater areas, if they want to preserve or expand bus opportunities, that they pay their fair share.
Do you believe the transportation system should be limited to buses at this point, or would you work to build support for other? When compared to our peer regions, we are one of the few regions that has bus only. Most places have light rail, commuter rail, bus rapid transit. Where would you like to see our system go?
Well, I'd like to see bus rapid transit. I also like to, intend to aggressively pursue a bike share plan for, obviously we'll start in urban core, but expand out. I'd like to see, and I'd like to see dedicated bike lanes, along the river, Wasson Way, along the Mill Creek, along the western riverfront corridor. And so I'd like to see, I know that's not what
Those
you're
are recreation, though, more than transportation.
Well, except that to a certain extent, yeah. But if you have a dedicated bike lane that goes up and down the river and goes up and down to Mill Creek, it could also be used for commuting as well. Look, I'm not going to rule anything out as it relates to rail, but it requires a dedicated funding source. The few times, including 2002 when it went to the ballot, it was defeated, decisively, and so I just don't want to spend time on something that I don't think the voters have an appetite to pay for.
We've got a
Josh.
question from Josh.
Yeah.
Josh Pickler.
Hey, the Cincinnati Business Committee has made centrifuge a real priority.
Yeah.
And is counting on additional public support
Yeah.
for the operational side of centrifuge. Can you talk about how you think about that and the kind of support you're prepared to give that, and then just stepping back a little bit, kind of the relationship you want to have with business leaders in the community?
First is yes. When I look at the future, I think about the Brandery, I think about centrifuge, I think about Dunnhumby. Candidly, I don't think about a 19th century streetcar. I just don't. I think the future is in people and developing our workforce and our entrepreneurial culture and incubator entrepreneurial environment. And, money doesn't grow on trees, and we have to make strategic priorities. And I do support helping centrifuge grow, including operational support. As a bigger picture, I have very good relationship with the business community now, and I intend to call on them regularly. And I have no doubt that they'll feel free to call on me. But I can promise you that I am going to be a very outgoing, I don't think this will come as a shock. I'm going to be a very outgoing mayor, and I will be, my goal is to keep the business community busy, I talked about in the campaign how Cincinnati Bell did such miraculous things at Taft. I'd like to ask other businesses to adopt underperforming urban schools. Again, my future vision is about people and developing and improving our school system, even though I don't have direct control, by bringing in corporate resources like Taft or Cincinnati Bell did at Taft, I think is a way to improve our community over the long term. And I intend to ask the business community to give back, not force them, I can't require them, but I do intend them to ask, to get on committees and ad hoc task force. And job number one is going to be sitting down with the chamber and the partnership and the Black Chamber and the Hispanic Chamber and say, okay, what is our regional job growth plan? How are we going to pursue and attract businesses to the city, and how can I help? And so I intend to be knocking on their door regularly, and it's a two-way street.
On that, what is your expectation for the partnership, and the city contributes to that? What would you like to see from them? What's a successful partnership look like to you?
Well, I think the question is, which is I think the goal of the partnership, and I've been out of office for 6 years now, 7 years, so I need to get up to speed on some of their doing, and I don't want to be critical when I know everybody's working hard. So, the big issue is, as companies are deciding where to locate, we want to have a very clear marketing message as to why they should choose Cincinnati. And we live, arguably, in the marketing capital of the world. And I would like to call upon the expertise, and I know that this is already happening, so I'm not trying to, I know that it's not like people aren't working on this now. But I want to call upon the expertise that we have in this region, which is incredible in marketing, and to do a better job. And I intend to, not to say I'm, this, when you live in the city that P&G lives in and Dunnhumby lives in and all these other amazing companies live in, I'm going to ask them to help us put together a marketing plan that works. And I want to be an instrument in that because I know they know more about marketing than I do.
Let me come back to the business community question. a lot of what you're talking about is leveraging,
Right.
really, the private sector in this business community.
Right.
There are some significant members of this business community who are frustrated at the least and pretty angry at worst about how the parking thing went down, and concerned about your real commitment to the Port Authority as an economic development agency, and your willingness to let the private sector do its thing, because that Port Authority has a pretty powerful smart board.
Yeah, I agree.
So what do you say to those folks, and how do you mend whatever relationships may have gotten off to a rocky start there, so that you can move forward with some of the other things you're talking about?
Well, I think, rumors of a rocky start are greatly exaggerated. I mean, we have some phenomenal leaders on the port board, several of whom I met with this week, to talk about how we're going to work together in the future. And remember, the parking plan wasn't the Port Authority's idea. It was the city manager's idea, and they sprung it upon the public in the middle of a budget discussion. And I think I've been very clear, and I think the voters have been very clear that we don't want it. And I read your editorial yesterday. We may not agree on it, but I think I've been pretty clear why I think it's a bad plan, and I think the voters sent a very clear message on that. And I think, frankly, it shows good faith on the part of the port to say, well, look, there was an election, and we're going to adjust as a result. And whether it's centrifuge or whether it's developing an equity fund for the port or helping them out of the gate in Bond Hill, we're going to be a partner.
Beyond parking and streetcar, are there some new initiatives that you'd like to talk about more on a long-term basis, looking forward a few years?
Yeah, I think if, like anything in life, you've really got to identify what are the strategic areas that you can't do everything. So what are the most important things to do? And so the areas that I've identified, first and foremost, in order to do the other things I'm going to mention, we got to get our budget in order. And I view that as tackling the pension, tackling the parking deal, tackling the streetcar, because I think they have such long-term dire consequences for our budget. But then that gives us the freedom to pursue a positive agenda, a pro-growth agenda for the future. And what I intend to be focused on is job growth, economic development on all fronts, whether that's working with the chambers to come up with a marketing plan to attract businesses to our region. It means continuing and accelerating the relationship we have with 3CDC and Uptown Consortium and the Port Authority. It means finishing the Banks project and those things that are more visible. Second is safety. I want to reduce the violence. I think it has a huge impact on building and creating a middle class. And we've seen a 50% increase in homicides. So I think we have to move aggressively to adopt the best patterns and practices around the country to find a better way forward on policing. Thirdly is I think we have to make major improvement as it relates to inclusion and becoming known as more of an inclusive city. And that relates to African American women and Hispanic-owned businesses. It relates to, equality issues. It relates to opening up the process to do what I would call sort of the Atlanta model and improving hiring and contracting and procurement policies. And then lastly is showing some big early wins in the neighborhoods like Wasson Way, like Westwood Square, and things of that nature.
Let's talk about personnel for a moment.
Yeah.
You mentioned safety. Have you met with the new police chief, and what's his future in your view? Secondly, the city manager announced last night he'll be resigning.
Yeah.
And I want to get your thoughts on who you see replacing him and what the qualifications and vision should be. And then vice mayor, who you see in that role.
Well, I have not met with the police chief, and I'd like to as quickly as possible. And Jay, please, we need to get that on the calendar soon. And so I don't know. I'm open-minded. What does matter to me is that the police chief be committed to the best patterns and practices from around the country to see the kind of safety improvement that cities like New York have seen. city manager.
City manager?
Yeah,
and
well,
vice mayor?
as I said last night, I think the most likely scenario, very likely scenario, is that we'll have an interim city manager that I'll be recommending, and by December 1st. And I'm not going to reveal who I'm talking to right now, but there's only 2 weeks, so soon enough. And then I have not made any final decisions on committee and vice mayor.
Will you do a national search for the city manager?
Yeah.
Okay. And then this is a question from Don Stefan. Following a long but thorough process, Cincinnati recently added to city zoning form-based codes, and it's hoped that the city transportation department will finally embrace traffic calming methods. Do you support continuing form-based codes and implementing traffic calming? And what's the future of the Go Cincinnati plan and Focus 52 funding?
Okay, that's a lot. Go Cincinnati, I'm a big supporter of, and I think the Port Authority's primary mission is, frankly, not parking, but to implement the Go Cincinnati plan. The Focus 52 is substance over form. I believe that we need to make strategic investments, whether that comes from a big loan pool or not is really a form issue, not a substance issue. The question is, do we have the resources we need to make the right investments? Form-based codes, I want to talk to council about that and see where they are. I've been in development myself. I think, and just to give one example, in East Price Hill, we had a neighborhood that a lot of people had given up on, and we had a hard time getting lending on, and banks said they would doing me a favor by turning me down, and they didn't believe that the neighborhood could be revitalized. And yet we were able to develop a pedestrian-friendly development with a new restaurant and condos, and now a community theater is coming along. And frankly, what was necessary was support from the community council, development corporations, developers, private financing, lending, all these things. And when I think about all the hurdles we faced in that project, the zoning code was not it. It was. The planning commission and the planning department embraced, and the community embraced our project, and it was, what I hear the goal of the form-based code, folks, is for developments like what we have in East Price Hill to revitalize urban neighborhoods. And so I'm not, it's never been clear to me why the zoning code is so important. I mean, for example, Westwood Square, in order to move Madcap, which is a phenomenal business, to Westwood Square, it doesn't really matter if the zoning code has changed. What matters is, do they have the financial resources to do that, and then have a green esplanade in the center of their community, which is, like Washington Park or, the Hyde Park Square, the green area there. I mean, it's really money, not zoning code.
Cindy.
Hi, Cindy Andrews. As your new City Hall reporter, you've made a lot of changes. Yes, and welcome to you. Already in your first 9 days, just post-election, should we expect more changes? How should I plan my schedule here in the next week or two?
Yeah.
And in your first week, 30 days in office, I mean, what are the things that you're going to be just nailing right away?
I expect it to be a very busy, 100 days, or whatever you want to call it. I mean, clearly, with the change of city manager, that's a huge deal. Clearly, unwinding the parking deal is a huge deal. Clearly, canceling and stopping the streetcar is a huge deal. And then there are other things that, we will do, right away. But, my goal is to get to a place quickly where the story isn't always, I want a resolution to the parking in the streetcar as fast as possible so that we can get to the budget, job growth, safety, inclusion, and neighborhoods, because those are, we got to remove the negative energy to get moving on a positive agenda for the future.
And a follow-up question on stopping the streetcar. Several readers asked, is there an upper limit that you're willing to spend to get out of the streetcar? Is there a point at which it's too expensive to stop it and it's more prudent to simply let it continue?
Yeah, of course, but
what is that number?
I mean, it seems to me, is it cheaper, what's more expensive, continuation or cancellation? I mean, that to me is the fundamental issue. And what's been reported, I believe in general the administration has not been forthcoming with the details in the accounting, which I intend to share with the public immediately upon taking office, and I'll find it fascinating too. But what has been shared, what has been reported, is that the costs of cancellation will be somewhere between $25 and $35 million, and the cost of continuation, by my calculation, is a minimum of $180 million, $100 million in local additional spending, and that's on the conservative side related to the Duke utility removals. The $4 million annual operating deficit, I put a 5 cap on that, which makes the net present value of that $80 million. That's my analysis, and obviously others may have a different analysis, but that's $180 million just to do phase 1, and the experts say it won't work unless you have phase 2. And the other thing about that, Julie, is I think for the first time the public's going to be given choices. So what I will be proposing publicly is that this community decide, do you want a riverfront park that I can finish in a couple years because I'm no longer using the TIF money for the streetcar but to finish the riverfront park, or do you want the streetcar? I think the park's a higher priority. Do you want Wasson Way and Westwood Square from the Blue Ash Airport money, or do you want the streetcar? And I don't believe the public's ever been leveled with that there are real trade-offs to these investments. And obviously, council has to agree with me ultimately, but I think in the end, the public and council will agree that there are better investments.
And how do you envision that input? By hearings, by a referendum? What do you?
Well, we would love a referendum of some kind. We don't have any fear of going back to the ballot on the streetcar. We intend to halt spending, and we intend to have a full accounting. I think that in my discussions with council members, there is a desire for there to be hearings and accounting of where all the money is, and to do so in an open and fair way that is transparent, but to make a final decision within a minimum of no less than 30 days, but probably no more than 90 days. But again, I don't want to put words in council's mouth. I mean, obviously they need to take the time that they believe is necessary, but I think we have broad agreement that while that occurs, that the spending needs to stop.
James.
You've mentioned a couple of times in terms of the budgetary issues facing the city, the city-run pension plan.
Mm-hmm.
As you know, it's got $870 million unfunded liability. It's only 61% funded going forward.
Right.
Now that issue 4 was defeated, what are your suggestions or your plans for filling that hole and making the plan more solvent?
Isn't my time up? Look, I mean, it's a tough one. I mean, the 3 big items, in my opinion, that hurt our budget are the streetcar, the parking, and the pension. And my way of the world, our budget's much better off if we just stop the streetcar and the pension. I mean, the streetcar and the parking. The pension's a much tougher nut to solve, and I'm going to be consulting with the board and looking at all options and working with council, and I'd like to tackle it within the first 100 days to come out with a plan to get through it.
The board did have a recommendation that they were going to put towards council, but that included $30 million from the parking deal. Now that they're going to have to go back and get another proposal, where do you see some of these? I know that there's other issues in terms of other things on the table in terms of cutting benefits and putting freezes in place and so forth. But I mean, this is eating a $30 to $40 million hole in the budget every year.
Yes.
How do you deal with this? And in long term, do you see eventually turning it over to the state?
Well, I doubt we'd turn it over to the state because, my understanding is that unless it's 100% funded, you're not going to be able to give it to the state anyway, and they wouldn't take it. So I don't think that's a realistic option. We're going to have to, I think as I outlined in the campaign, it's a three-legged stool that affect the overall health of the fund. You've got what do you put in, what are the benefits, and what's your investment strategy? And I think we're failing on all three fronts right now. Now from the taxpayer's point of view, from the citizen's point of view, what hurts them the most is the amount we put in. Because if we put in $30 million a year out of the general fund, I mean, that comes directly out of the ability to put cops and firefighters on the street and to pick up garbage and to pave roads and to pick up litter. And the current model is clearly unsustainable. It's unfair to the I mean, right? Even on you think about it, on a 24% contribution, 20% contribution, 24% contribution, that means the taxpayers are getting 76 cents on the dollar. I mean, that's not right. I mean, we have to get to a place by solving the issue that the tax dollar is more fair. People are willing to pay taxes, but they should receive value in return. And I don't think they should be only getting 76 cents on a dollar. So I think, but having said that, we've inherited this huge mess. So in the short term, it's quite unfortunate, but we're going to have to sacrifice some things that we would like to provide to taxpayers to help buy down this liability, and including 24% contribution on an annual basis or potentially higher in the short term. But secondly, I think that's only fair to do that if we ask for changes on the other two stools. So we're going to have to continue to look at benefits on a prospective basis and make changes. And people are living longer, people are working longer, and we're going to have to adjust the benefits accordingly. Thirdly is the investment strategy. I think that we have not kept pace with the market, and we need to look at getting a better return than we have.
John, I want to be respectful of your time, and so I think we're running short. So I want to ask you more about inclusion.
Yeah.
You talked about it a lot in
Yeah.
your speech the night of the election.
Yeah.
So you made it a priority in
Yeah.
that speech. And then I'm struck that now we have what I would call a controversy at UC. African American students and faculty feeling concerned that there's not a feeling of inclusion there. That reflects on our city as well while they sort that out. Is it in your view about minority contracts and minority business? Is it something bigger than that in our community? How would you define the issue? And what are the other things that we as a community need to do?
Well, I think the fundamental issue is a disparity in health and wealth between the white and the black and the Hispanic community. And, there's a lot of historical reasons for those disparities, but it's a disparity that we've inherited that we need to try to fix. And it's just not healthy for us to have these kinds of disparities continue. And there's a very long list of things that contribute and are part of these overall issues. And clearly we've made, through very painful times for our community, we've made progress, although I'm not suggesting these issues are solved, but we've made progress on a number of civil rights fronts as it relates to police-community relations. And I was there, and I'm proud to say that I was part of trying to do things differently. And it was never easy, but we worked through it and we made progress. Now, not that those issues are finished, but we've clearly made major progress. I think the bigger civil rights front for the future is going to be economic. And so I think that the focus now has got to be about building and expanding black middle class, Hispanic middle class, through aggressively looking at how Atlanta did that and how we can emulate them within the Constitution in a way that works to really improve the outcomes.
This is related. It's from Sue Wilkie of Northside. Is it time to set up a commission similar to the Bangor-Smale Commission to look at the issue of poverty? We have a 25% poverty rate approaching 50% childhood poverty rate. Would something as formal as a commission do anything, or what else could be done to? I know you had a plan.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I hadn't thought of that, but I'm open to it. And obviously, I did lay out my Hand Up initiative during the campaign. I intended to implement that in the budget. in June. I mean, to put it out sooner than that, but to try to get it approved in the June and July budget. But yeah, I think that the more we as a region and a community and a city engage on the issue of poverty, I think the more we're likely to make a difference. I think that's, I hadn't thought of it, but I think it's a great idea.
So let me wrap up.
Yeah.
Try to sum back up, go back to where we started a little bit.
Yes.
So tell us what to expect in your first 60 days.
Well, I think we're going to see a new, obviously we'll see an interim city manager. I think we're going to see a bipartisan governing approach. I think you're going to see resolution to the streetcar, hopefully to stop it. I think you're going to see resolution to the parking deal and a plan to move forward to modernize the system. I think you're going to see us making strategic and aggressive efforts on getting the budget under control, showing a very aggressive effort at job growth and economic development, a very aggressive effort at beginning the process of implementing best patterns and practices for improving safety, trying to get some early wins in the neighborhoods, and beginning the process of changing the procurement and the contracting policies to improve outcomes on inclusion.
Okay. Thank you. You should know that we have had hundreds of people watching and lots of people submitting questions and participating, which is exactly the role we would like to play too. Smart questions in our own form of inclusion with our community. So I hope you'll do this again with us.
Absolutely. I enjoy it.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks to everybody.
Thanks.